listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Welcome to episode 94 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is Dave Sharkey. Dave is an Irishman who trained as an English teacher in London and has been working and coaching in the UK for the past 12 years. He currently coaches at HAC RFC and hosts a blog titled The Great White Sharkey, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks very much for having me. It's an honor to be on. I've been listening to your podcast for quite some time, and it's been a big part of my learning journey. So yeah, to be asked on is a bit surreal, to be honest.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Firstly, the I'll get to my usual intro questions in a minute, but the blog title, The Great White Sharkey, possibly the best blog handle in the interwebs, is my vote. Yeah,
it's been, I've gotten a few comments about it. A few people have said, like, is it some sort of alt-right white supremacist group? It's not. It's really not. It's just a play on my name, of course. So.
Yeah. Well, coming from a surfing background, I respect the Great Whites. So great job.
Good stuff.
So what about you? What's your backstory with playing and picking up the game initially over in Ireland?
So yeah, I'm from a small town in the middle of Ireland called Mullingar, and back when I was a kid, Gaelic football was the big thing in my family. So I grew up playing that, and I had no interest in playing rugby whatsoever. My older brother Ronan had been coaxed to play rugby, and my dad tried to make me follow suit, and I was having none of it. So he kind of gave me a fairly straightforward option. He said, you can try out rugby. And I was like, nope. And he goes, or you can give Irish dancing a go. And being as nice belligerent and stubborn strategy as I am, I went for Irish dancing. So, but yeah, I only lasted about a week or two. And then in floods of tears, I was like, right, come on, let's give this rugby, gave a crack. So I got into rugby there in Mullingar, absolutely loved it. And as a sort of big kid, I realised that I was probably way more disposed to playing rugby than I was Gaelic football. The skills would be similar to kind of AFL in some of the way in which they kind of kick and control the ball. But yeah, no, I was about tackling and carrying and running with the ball. So that's how I got into rugby. I went to a rugby school then for secondary, Clongowes College, about 30 miles outside of Dublin, and it's such a big rugby school, and because it's boarding 24/7, we just played, all year round. There was big cup competitions that we were sort of spent, 7 out of 9 months of the year getting ready for, and not always doing particularly well in those cup competitions. But yeah, it was Rugby was obviously something that as soon as I started in Mullingar and carried on in school, that I was just mad about. So yeah, it's always been something that I've been hugely passionate about and really, really enjoyed. Yeah,
that school rugby in that Leinster area is just out of control. It's so strong.
It is, and it's going from strength to strength, to be honest. A lot of schools that weren't so strong when I was in Clongowes, like St. Michael's, are now the kind of powerhouses. And they're down the road from Blackrock, who are also a big powerhouse. Yeah. And they're just feeding into the Leinster system, which is great. But I actually think it's creating a bit of a glut of talent kind of building up that I think some of those boys need to go to France or England if they want to play pro rugby. If they don't, obviously that's grand. But there's a lot of good players coming out of that system.
Yeah, 100%. What about coaching? What were your first coaching experiences like?
So after I left Clongowes, I had the option of going into to UCD, University College Dublin, to play rugby there, like in a fairly strong under-20 side there. Right. And I played some rep rugby in school. as well in terms of Leinster schoolboys. So there was this kind of idea that maybe I kind of go in and I go into UCD and see what happens or whatnot. But there was also an offer to go to Australia, and the 2003 World Cup was rolling around, and I was an 18, 19-year-old going, that sounds like fun. So I ended up in Joey's in Sydney, and that was my first ever coaching experience. I hadn't coached in Ireland before, and I got given, this mightn't sound like a great accolade, but the boys who I coached, who I was out there with, will understand this, that I was given the sixth 15 in Joey's to coach, right? And people are going, 6-15, that's nothing. There was 12 or 13, opens teams in Joey's. And all the other boys who I coached with, the English lads who I coached with, were given the 13 Fs and whatnot. So the fact that I was given older kids, and that they were a senior team and it was the sixth, was pretty good going. So that was me dipping my toe, I suppose, into coaching for the first time. And
so what did you do with them?
I did exactly what I had done to me, like we all kind of do. A lot of barking, a lot of shouting, a lot of fire and brimstone stuff. And I remember, and I shudder at this thought, I remember offering one of the lads a $20 bill for whoever put in the biggest hit, in our our rival game against someone. And $20 back then could get you probably more than 2 or 3 beers. There was a lot of scrapping or what for that. So I'm glad to say that's a chapter of my coaching that I no longer quite recognise, which is good.
Yeah, we've all got to have those moments. So otherwise, you just keep doing it, and if you're not reflecting on it and turning the mirror inwards, there's no growth at all. And so strike that up as a cringeworthy but learning memory.
It was definitely so when I went back home to Ireland, I ended up coaching while I was in college with a good mate of mine, Gab Murphy. The two of us worked in CUS in Dublin, and they weren't really a rugby school, and we'd come from a rugby school, and we were sort of asked to come in and do some coaching with them. And I followed in the same vein, but I remember being kind of challenged because we coached all different age groups, that it was definitely a kind of different sort of challenge. And I was beginning, I suppose, to think, hang on, is this the best way to do it or whatnot? But if I look back at that time, there's 3 kind of words, I suppose, that stand out to me in terms of coaching and what I thought coaching was, what I was doing, and maybe what I was seeing other people around me doing. And that was it was about volume. So it was about big reps and who's kind of who can do it the most, or who, that was a huge part of it. It was about certainty. You had to be, so clear in what you believed, or believe in yourself, that you were so certain in what you were saying. And probably the last one, and it's interesting to see where I've come with this, is the last thing the best way I could probably describe this is peacocking, is the idea that it was a lot of men sort of, suggesting that they had it their way and it was right. And whoever shouted loudest, or whoever did it the most in terms of got through the reps or made people, suffer the most or whatnot. That was what I saw. And that's what I was replicating and I was following.
Yeah. No, I had a good mate of mine on the podcast, Dave Morrow. He's a ex-Army, Canadian Army, did a tour of Afghanistan, and he refers to it as instead of leadership, he calls it loudership, and it's a pretty accurate description.
I'd say so, and I certainly fell into that trap 100%.
And so, how did you get out of that trap? How did you change? How did you evolve? Were there key moments, or was it a gradual switch?
Now, you're not going to believe me, and your listeners will think this is some sort of setup. But to be honest, my probable change and moving away from that happened at a time when I was listening to Rusty on the Coach's Corner podcast. So I don't know, that's back, is that 2016 maybe?
Yeah, that would have been. So he's been on twice actually. So
yeah. It was the first time I think he was on. I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Yeah, that was a massive one for me too.
It was just more so that there was a different way from what I was seeing of how to coach. And, it was more so Rusty was doing something quite different. And then, there was other avenues, and you were having people on. There was other things going on that suggested, hang on, you could do this different. This doesn't have to look like it has. But it also coincided, I suppose, Andy, with a time in my own career as a teacher where I was trying to develop as a teacher, and I'd spent a lot of time trying to develop that. And then I kind of was like, I was getting really excited about coaching, and then I wanted to develop in that area. So there was definitely, and I'm certainly not the only one, if we think about what's happened to sort of coach education informally, I suppose, over the last few years, is that a lot of coaches were sort of desperate to sort of, improve and to learn and to soak up again
That's
information.
why I started the podcast.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Because I selfishly.
Yeah. And I think it's definitely something that I'd found this resource, your resource, and then there was someone in the UK who was talking in this vein, like Rusty, and he'd set up the Magic Academy, the early days of that. And you're suddenly already into a community of people who are asking questions. And it's not that, as I said, the things of volume and certainty and Peacock, it's far less of that, or, than I'd experienced before. So that's, I suppose, set me on that journey, which then to get qualifications and sort of connect with other people, that's been pretty exciting, to be honest.
Oh, cool. And what about now? What's well? Firstly, I'm stoked that the pod had a little hand in that, because definitely, shout out to Rusty. That was definitely in my some of the most influenced or influential episodes that I've done. So stoked that it had results for you there. And what about now? What's your coaching look like now with HAC RFC?
Yeah. So as a teacher, I spent almost, even since Joey's, like I was always coaching school kids. I didn't coach in a club. It was always school kids. And that comes with the sense of, because I was a teacher at those schools, it always came with a different sort of edge to it. Yeah. Now, the HAC who I coach with now is a men's club in London. And it is technically, again, it's connected to the Army. So it's the Honourable Artillery Company, so right. The HAC. But again, the Army aren't necessarily, we kind of use their grounds or whatnot. And again, your listeners should definitely Google HAC RFC and go to images, and you'll see again in the city of London, the gherkins in the background, all the high rise, and then this pitch is sort of in the middle, surrounded by skyscrapers. It's an incredible setting. And we use the HAC, we use their kind of armory house, which is kind of like their mess hall and their barracks and whatnot, as our sort of clubhouse. So cool. It's a pretty cool setup. But how did an Irishman find his way into a sort of a British Army officer's mess?
And more to the point, how does your family feel about this?
Yeah, I definitely get a few wry looks. People like, hang on, what? Sorry, what? I don't always explain what the acronym means, and I kind of get away with it. Yeah. But yeah, so on this kind of journey, triggered by yourself and Rusty years ago, I was kind of going through some qualifications, and I got what was a level 2 award, and then my level 3, which is a year-long RFU program. As part of that, I kind of connected with the coach Rhys Davies in the RFU, and okay. Rhys was running a course, and I was on at a CPD, and I just said to him, listen, I'm applying for my level 3, and who do you coach with? And he was coaching with the HAC. So we sort of kept in touch. And then a couple of months later, he asked, listen, I was keen to come and see a session. So I said to him, listen, do you mind if I come down? And on the way, he said, listen, my assistant coach isn't coming tonight. Do you want to help out? And I said, yeah, sure, that's fine. Now, I didn't tell him. That was the first time I coached adults. Like, that was the first time I coached people who didn't have to call me sir. After each one of my kind of rambling kind of, nonsense things that I might say on a rugby pitch. So I did that once or twice. And then later that year, he just said to me, listen, do you want to come down next year and get involved? So that would have been the summer of 2019. So yeah, that's how I've been involved with them since. So myself and Rhys are kind of still plugging away there. So
sweet. Based on what we've talked about in this interview so far, what if someone was to come and watch one of your sessions? What are they going to see? What's your favourite part of the game to coach, and what would your session look like?
So I think Rhys and I, definitely, we become very, very interested in sort of like session design and kind of building kind of exercises, games, drills that kind of complement each other. So they're working at a style of play we're trying to work at. So at the moment, we're looking at this idea of controlling speed. So I've become really interested in all the things in the game that influence the pace of the game. Okay, so that could be an offload. That could be a tackle where I get back to my feet. So right at the moment, we're kind of, it's what I'm calling pogies, pace of game influences. So you'd see, if you came to a session, you'd see me sort of being very, very particular about how quickly our ruck speed is, or our ball presentation, or our offload has to be in contact one-handed, because if we do it where we just get touched and throw the ball, that's not realistic. So you'd see me sort of frantically looking at a sort of game, and it's nothing like what I've designed, and me being trying to be okay with that, I suppose, as best I can. That's possibly maybe what you'd see, but you'd also probably see me repeat certain phrases and questions, maybe, because one thing in my planning I think that I've gotten better at, or certainly I'm paying a lot of attention to at the moment, is what are the verbal cues or prompts for the stuff we're going to cover that will help them understand what I'm trying to say and will remind them. So as a teacher, this idea of recall and kind of drip feeding stuff through and coming back to it. So you would see me designing some sort of game, maybe over the top or whatever, looking at pace of game influences and, repeating some sort of strange phrase that makes sense to me and hopefully the players.
Yeah, I think that's cool. And, you're creating your own acronyms. That's massive. It's groundbreaking stuff. I always say to my students, you've got to use acronyms because it makes you sound smarter. So you're well on your way there. But I think that's really important. It's especially like, coach to player, but also player to player. That I ban the word communication. They're not I call it intel.
Thank you.
Communication just means I actually tell my players monkeys will communicate by throwing feces at each other. So the word communication is so broad and it doesn't actually tell us anything. So I call it intel. And I've been working. It's interesting you're talking about this, because I've been working a lot on this on the last couple of years. Is when we're under stress, where we're fatigued, and we need to do something in defense, which is where I'm coaching right now. What are some simple words that everyone on the team knows that are 1-2 syllables max, and that we get that word out and we get the desired response from it. I think it's underlooked at in coaching in terms of its importance in practice, but also in games.
It's an aspect of the game that I think coaches can definitely get it. I think you can get, it's a slower burn. It's maybe not as cool as, it's harder to see. And I think because it's slower burn, people might lose patience with it. But actually, I think you're going to see more people again engaging with the language that they're using and whatnot in it. I actually told the lads at the HAC, so we call a game of touch replay where we're trying to, it's about speed, controlling the pace of the game. I call it Pogi touch for pace of game influences. So I told them that I made up that Japan, to get their speed of play before the 2019 World Cup, they played Pogi touch. And because I just gave that to them, they were like, oh, cool, yeah, Japan play quick, that's fine, yeah, let's go with it. But it actually just stands for pace of game influences, and I haven't had the heart to tell them since then. So
they'll find out if any of
avid listeners of your podcast. And coming back to acronyms, there was a mate of mine who was trained to be a doctor a few years ago, and he said one of his first lectures, they walked in and said, you got to know your TLAs. And someone's like, puts up their hand going, what are TLAs? They go, your 3-letter acronyms. And I was like, right, okay, cool. So yeah, I fall into that trap as well.
Yeah. No, but it's good. It's efficient, and you get your point across, and it's a collective understanding of what's required. So yeah, awesome. Another thing I was going to say about the acronyms too is you can tie some theming into it as well. We'll get to theming in a minute, but let's talk about your blog, the Great White Sharkey. I love it. Best name. What was your reasoning to start up a blog?
So as an English teacher, I spend a lot of time telling other kids how to write, and I am their audience, and I am, I need to be pleased in many cases as to, what they give me. And I'm like, no, this won't do, that won't do. So I kind of thought I'd put my money where my mouth is to a certain extent, to kind of put my neck on the line and write for real. So the Great White Sharkey actually started out as a blog based off some kind of pundit work, journalism stuff I was writing about rugby for Pundit Arena. So I wrote a couple of articles for Pundit Arena. One in which I suggested that Ireland had nothing to fear of the All Blacks in Chicago, which somehow came true. So someone was trying to say, oh, that's some sort of insight. All I said in the article is that, like, we got to stop deifying these guys. If we keep talking like they're gods, then we'll never beat them. And someone thought that it was a tip off that I said we were going to win. Not quite, but so off the back of some, I'll take it. So off the back of some of that punditry stuff, I said, I'm going to write my own stuff. I'm going to write, see again who listens, me typing into the void, quite a bit of that. But it's set up as a result of that. But what I found, Andy, is that I was writing punditry stuff, and all I was doing was just repeating other people's ideas, stuff I heard on shows. And it just felt like a kind of, I was typing up stuff like I'd heard down the pub that I was just regurgitating. And I was trying to find a way to express it in a new way or think differently. And I kind of hit a bit of a dead end with it. So I dropped it for a while. And then I found the best way to kind of express maybe what I was doing in coaching. So I was like, well, no one is doing what I'm doing in coaching. Why don't I just write about that? So I started writing about some of the masculinity project stuff, which I started up a few years ago. And I thought, what, this would be a way to, I'm creating content for other people to engage with, and other people can give me feedback on it and can tell me what they think about it. And as you say, like an informal way to sort of to develop. So that's the background of it. That's how it kind of started up. So a kind of failed punditry. I didn't know enough about the game to comment on it originally, so I just had to write about my own experiences.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. And one of the ones that I looked at that really piqued my interest was around theming and creating themes, whether it be weekly or for seasons. Can you talk a little bit about that article there? What got you going with that?
So we've kind of mentioned some of the stuff already about kind of language and how you might maybe shape terminology, coach to coach, coach to player, player to player, and as I said, as a teacher, language has been something that I've been really, really interested in, and I actually originally came across theming as a way to do that. So that was, to me, that's what it was going to be. It's a way that we can capture some of the words and phrases. Let's create an identity for ourselves, so much so that we can use our own language. That's where I came to it with. And actually what I think is that that's now a strand of theming as I see it in a much broader sense. So I've spent the last few years looking at a few different themes. So the first one I did was Project Apollo, which looked at the Apollo 11 mission to land on the moon. I did that with a schoolboy team. Then we did a Shackleton, Ernest Shackleton endurance in the Antarctic for the HAC, who were trying to survive that year, the second half of the season relegation. And now currently with the HAC, and we spent the last year, because we haven't had games, but we've had lots of training, we've embedded our new theme, which is looking at Ayrton Senna. So this ties into our idea of speed and playing at speed. Now, regularly when people talk about speed is that, so when we talk about Senna, people think, oh, you want to go as quickly as possible. But then you're like, no, we got to control our speed. So it's not so much about playing as fast as we can. There's times when we want to do that, but actually what's our braking like, how are we going to manage our fuel or whatnot. So there's different ways, I suppose, that we can package some of the things that we're doing with theming. So that's the sort of stuff I've been exploring. So about a year ago, after I finished the Shackleton theme, I'd written up all my stuff on the Great White Sharkey, on Apollo, and then Shackleton. And then what I realized from engaging with coaches is that people were like, oh, this is cool, but how do you pick stories, or how do you do this, or how will this apply to me? And so I kind of went, okay, from doing two themes, what would be the framework you would use to build this from scratch? what's the framework I'm going to use for a new theme? So I was thinking of Senna at the time, but I was like, cool. So I need a framework here. We can't just go, I'll just crack on with Senna and see what happens. I was like, if I was to explain this to someone who's never done this before, like if they like theming, but they don't know where to start, what are some of the things I could ask them to do? So I wrote up a framework about 13, last May. And it exploded. Like people were contacting me from all over the world in all sorts of sports or whatnot, reaching out saying the article was cool. Can I ask you a few more questions about it or whatnot? And that's kind of when I saw that this is a really interesting way for people to present again what they're trying to do. And I think it's a way to create a team identity. And I don't like, as much as language is a part of theming, I think it's as I said, it's just that part of it. But I see it as a kind of tool to create more cohesion between your teams, between the groups of people, again, that you play with or kind of work alongside. And again, please, any of your listeners who are sports psychs, I've been desperately trying to connect with sports psychs to give me some sort of research or background into this, but I see theming as a possibly, if you want to use it this way, as a kind of sort of psychological periodization, where basically you're trying to prime people for certain bits of this story or certain bits of this theme. How are you gonna respond to setback or failure? What are you going to do in this sort of situation? Like, it's trying to get us ready for those moments. And if you know your story well enough, you know your theme well enough, I think you can do that. So it's been really exciting and a fairly novel way to coach over the last while.
Yeah, cool. No, it sounds really interesting. Just thinking of some of the guests I've had on the show. Michael Checker did a lot of stuff like this with, especially with the Waratahs and the Wallabies as well, where they tie in different themes or different family stories, or he did an activity where it's like you present your family tree and things like that. And I think the Crusaders do some pretty cool stuff as well, if I'm not mistaken. They
were the ones who I realized were first doing it. So I first heard about theme. Yeah, I heard about them theming from their Muhammad Ali theme back when they first won their Super Rugby title. So that's a good few years ago now, and it was Scott Robertson and Rowan O'Gara talking about it on a podcast show.
Yeah. I think I might have heard that. Yeah,
that's the 10-14, an Irish guy and a Kiwi.
Yeah.
But basically, they were talking about it, and they spoke about all this stuff they did, and I had done that work on masculinity the year before, and I was looking for a way to kind of, rather than those being like, oh, this isn't really connected, is there a way we could tie this together? And theming kind of could fit that. And I was also thinking about language. So I heard this and went, oh, this could be interesting. And then I was thinking, now I need to decide what a theme is. And lo and behold, I was listening to a podcast about Apollo 11, and I was like, this might work. So yeah, the Crusaders have been doing it for a while. I know that it wasn't Scott Robertson who first did it. I know that Wayne Smith apparently did it to Robertson when he was a player, and he did the Battle of Thermopylae, which is the 300, the Spartans holding off the 300 soldiers holding off the million Spartans, apparently. Mm-hmm. Sorry, million Persians at the gates of fire, I think is what it's known as. So.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And you mentioned that framework. How's that framework operate if coaches were looking to explore theming in their own environments?
So the big thing the reason I kind of came up with the framework wasn't just because coaches were saying, oh, I like what you've done, but I don't know what I would do. It was actually partially because people were saying, oh, Apollo, that's awesome, I'm going to do Apollo. And I stopped and went, why? Or someone heard me talk about Shackleton and some of the cool stuff. Like, there was some really cool moments in the Shackleton one. As much as ultimately we didn't get the chance to finish out the season because of COVID and we got relegated. I still think we had cool experiences and memories. And for me, that's what a huge part of it is about. But as I said before, I wouldn't have done Apollo with the HAC boys, and I wouldn't have done Shackleton with the school kids. So for me, what story you choose is important. So it was more me trying to check coaches to say, listen, stop. Why do you want to do this? You think this sounds cool or whatever, but what happens if, you're not winning? Do you abandon your theme? Like, because I was going to stick with it because I thought about which story I wanted. So there was a few things that I think that were important. So the first thing is that find a story that you belong to, or your group belongs to. So find something that's going to resonate with them. So depending on who it is that's in front of you, find out what'll make them tick. Ask them in advance. What they're interested in. Find out. So before the Senna stuff we did, and the lads knew we were probably onto something in the HAC, we found out who all the F1 nuts were in the club. And we did that simply by going, has anyone seen Drive to Survive on Netflix? And the boys who shot up going, oh, it's amazing. We're like, cool. These are maybe our cultural architects who will be able to help us with the theme. Nice. So you kind of bounce a few ideas around with guys like that. That's an underhand maybe way to do it. But the framework would be find a story that you belong to, find landmarks in the story, key characters or key events that are going to resonate. So in Apollo, a key character for us was Michael Collins, the third man of Apollo 11, who doesn't set foot in the moon. And he embodied that, selflessness, that sacrifice, that making others shine that we wanted to promote in that story. Find a story that there's characters or values that you want to reflect. Like, do you want to promote this person? Sure, they're a great whatever, but are they a good person? And are you going to make that distinction clear where people might misunderstand it? So find values that underpin your story, and then find some totems maybe that might bring it to life. Find like what physical object might kind of help you. So the Crusaders under Robertson O'Gara used boxing gloves to symbolize Muhammad Ali. I know later when they did a Golden State Warriors theme, they put on the ski mask goggles for like celebrations. They like bought these and stuff, and they had like yeah. Pretty confident they're going to win, to be fair. So maybe that's all right. But right like on. They bought like basketball singlets. So those would be totems that can bring it to life for you. You can use language. You can consider what those things are. And again, there's other stuff there that I suppose I talk about a little bit more on my post about theming on my website. But the big thing for me is that you don't have to go all in with the theme. So you can dial it up or dial it down. And it doesn't, like, if you're doing the theme, if your theme is is turned up to 11 all of the time, right? Every day that you're there, you're going to burn them out, especially if you see them a lot. Now, you find moments where you're going to talk up the theme and it's going to be big and we're going to have lots of totems and we're going to talk about the story. And then there's other days where it's not that present and it's kind of lower down. So for me, find that emotional pitch. It's kind of like you're not going to do contact all the time. Sorry, maybe there are some coaches out there who are still doing contact. Hopefully not all the time, every chance they get. But it's a bit like that kind of conditioning in the sense of, find, guess the kind of mood of the group, what they need. Is now the time to keep talking about Shackleton? Maybe not. Let's maybe give it a breather for this evening. So, that's some of the ideas again around it that I've sort of rushed through there.
No, that's cool. And I think, I'll put the links in the show notes to your blog, but I think it's great for coaches to express their own creativity and some ideas that are outside of, the standard X's and O's of session planning. All right. One of the other articles that really popped out to me was one that you talk about fostering empathy. It's one that I think is really important. What was your backstory there in terms of why you wrote that, and what were some of the big messages in that one?
So, being an English teacher, I used to think that there was something quite narcissistic about reading. And this is, bear with me on this. So basically, like, books that I read that really sort of resonated with me, I had to make it about me. It was how I felt about it as the experience. And I had to identify with the characters. I had to see the world from their perspective. But actually, it was more about maybe crafting a sense of empathy. Like, I could see the world through other people's perspectives, and literature allows you to do that. And the more stories we hear about people, I think the more chances we have to do that. So for me as a teacher, that became something that was quite important to me. This idea of, if I'm teaching literature to kids, this is a chance for me to get them to step outside of themselves and see the world from someone else's perspective, which hopefully then when they're back in themselves, they can get a greater appreciation. So that's one part of it. How did I bring that into rugby? That project, which I did on redefining masculinity, that was if I wanted, that looked at mental health, emotional well-being, and gender dynamics in sport. Those are the three core areas that I wanted to look at. So this predates the theming stuff that I've done. And when I was doing this, and when I was kind of trying to get, players I was talking about mental health. There's no point me just talking about it unless I create an environment that is going to be empathetic. So that's not an easy thing to do. So how do you kind of foster that? So we had conversations about it. We tried to define it. We used some of Brené Brown's work on what's the difference between sympathy and empathy, and we might call it out if we saw it, or we saw someone who wasn't being empathetic. If I wasn't being empathetic, for example, they might call me out on it. So that's sort of the idea where we got to with it. But for me, so many people think that you have to have gone through the same experience as someone else, and I don't think that's true. The best way I think I could capture, I think mostly what empathy is for me is compassionate acknowledgement. It's being heard. Like, people just want to be heard, and whatever it is they're frustrated with, it's like, I'm so guilty of trying to fix stuff all the time. So a student comes to me and I'm trying to fix it because they want it, they need this, or they're whatever it is, or a player comes to me and they want this, and I'm trying to go like, well, hang on, have you done this? Have you done that? Oh, we can't fix it. So rather than that, it's actually just going, that's crap. I don't know what to say. That's awful. I don't know what we can do about this, but I'm glad you told me. That's compassionate acknowledgement that I would argue, and that was something we tried to foster in a rugby environment as best we could. And how successful it was, we'll have to find out when we bump into those players in a few years' time.
Yeah, I think it's got to be really challenging because I know I've been in some great environments. I've been in some other environments that aren't great, and there was not a lot of empathy. And I think, I don't know, I think maybe the nature of the sport as well, in that it's a physical, combative sport, and that you're meant to be tough, whatever that description is, might lead to the fact that some of those environments aren't very empathetic.
There's two lads in the HAC who set up their own podcast, All Chats Pod, and they talk about their mental health hiccups on that show. They interview people, they bring them on to talk about their experiences of mental health.
Awesome. And
whatnot. And that's a great, so when I've spoken to them, I've said, and as you've just said, rugby has this image that it's macho, it's tough, and it's bottle up your feelings and whatnot. But why can't a rugby dressing room be an empathetic environment? Why? What's to stop it being that? Because those two boys proved that. They met in a rugby club. They have a few points afterwards, and they realized that actually they had been through some struggles that they confided in and helped each other out, and thought, you know what, so off this, they've set up this podcast where they have these conversations. I'm not saying everyone has to go out and start a podcast, but there's opportunities for connection and empathy that we're maybe missing all the time. So why can't a sports environment be an empathetic environment where people, if they wish and if they feel comfortable and if they have those proper connections, can open up and share and seek help if they need it?
Yeah, I think it's crucial too, especially for younger kids, with social media as prevalent and as invasive as it is. There's no empathy on social media. So they need it in real life connections with their fellow players and their coaches and teachers.
I think that's a really good point about social media, because social media is something they go often. I'm sorry, I say they, I mean me as well. We go to feel validated, to see how many likes or clicks or whatever it is. We get this sentiment, and maybe we go there also seeking empathy or being open, and that's not always what we get, because it's such a dangerous forum where it could go go awry. So how do we, in the environments in which we work, be it school, coaching, whatever sport you're involved in, drama, dance, who knows, how can we create more empathetic environments and better forums for people to share who they are, acknowledge when they're down, for you to acknowledge again when you're down and not feeling great, or when you're fantastic. I don't know. I just think the big motivation behind that was that I just thought, I looked at rugby and thought, we can do better. I can do better. That was the rationale behind it.
All right, that's great. Like I said, I will put the links in the show notes. I'll also throw up a link to the podcast of your team, your players there. I think it's a great initiative that they're doing there. So if anyone wants to check that out.
I appreciate that, mate. That's very kind.
Awesome. People should definitely check out the Great White Sharkey. You got some good stuff there on like you mentioned, masculinity, and also there's one on Confessions of a Women's Rugby Novice, which is a good read as well. So some homework for listeners there. All right. Before we wrap things up, you recently started a side project based on your blog, based on the theming activity called Team Architecture. You're looking to support coaches and teams to create, more cohesion and richer experiences. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's progressing, and if people wanted to reach out?
Yeah, so this is kind of hot off the press in the sense that I've only sort of recently kind of got myself sorted to start this going. But yeah, so based off some of the work I've done with sports teams and some of the work I've done, especially around theming, I've set up my own sort of company, which is Team Architecture Limited, and that looks at, again, connection, collaboration, and cohesion amongst the sporting or the work teams that we all sort of work in day to day. And the reason that's kind of come about is that off the back of some of the work that I'd written on the connections between groups of people or whatnot. As I said, I'd lots of kind of coaches from around the world contact me in cricket and GAA and football and hockey, field hockey, I think, not necessarily ice hockey.
Thank you.
Or real hockey, as you now call it. But yeah, basketball, boxing, like lots of coaches kind of reaching out to me, and they were very interested in theming. And for me, I see theming as a way to create cohesion and connection. So I've ended up working with a rugby coach this past year, and I've been designing a theme for him to implement with his group of players. And that's been a fascinating sort of experience, because I've done it myself, but how do I actually design it for someone else? So part of that is the theming that we do. We kind of assess the club and the players and the individuals and what they want and their ambitions and where they're trying to get to and how the theme might link into that. We looked at presentations, pre-match, post-match. We looked at their use of language. So with all of that, I kind of decided that actually this is something that, that they've got a huge amount of benefit out of. I've loved doing it. So it's definitely something that I'm looking to kind of connect with other coaches to do as well. So be that kind of coaching or mentoring or observations to sort of, give people, my feedback or kind of outside perspective, or designing some kind of key messaging or whatnot. That's sort of what team architecture is going to be all about.
Awesome. Sounds exciting. And if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
So probably to get me on Twitter at the moment at Teaching Sharks. Or the Great White Sharkey.com, my blog, which has got a serious amount of publicity tonight, mate. You're way too kind. And I'll set up social media for team architecture when I figure out how to use Instagram, I'm sure.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm still struggling with it. My Instagram game is just embarrassing, but Canva is your friend. I've worked out. Anyhow, I'm still a Insta novice. All right. Well, let's wrap things up with the final 4 questions. When you were a kid growing up in Ireland, once your Irish dancing career went into decline and you moved over to rugby, who are some of those first players that really drew you in?
Michael Flatley. No, I can't say Irish dancing. So, do you know what? It was the 95 World Cup, and it's not the winger you're thinking of. It was Chester Williams for the Springboks. Yeah, Lomu amazing. Was such a colossus, and he literally ran over Ireland in a group game. Although I think we went up in that game. We scored first. And as someone said, that was the worst thing to do because you just pissed them off. But yeah, no, Chester Williams, I don't know. And the fact that they won and his story is so kind of interesting and fascinating in a national story that was unfolding he was definitely someone I sort of looked at and went, wow, that's he's pretty cool.
Yeah, and he's like you said, the time that it was in South African history, him and that team played a massive part. Awesome. What about now? Who are some of the players you like watching?
I really like watching players who are pushing the fringes of their position or what we think they can do. Antoine Dupont is obviously, he's changing how we see number nines and support play.
Yeah.
He's unbelievable. Levani Bhatia in the centre for La Rochelle is a bit of a monster who's actually a back rower who now plays 12. And then a bit closer to home, Tyke Byrne, who's back row for Munster, Ireland, and 100%. Fingers crossed the Lions. I think he's doing some pretty cool stuff.
All right, and the third question, what about coaches? Who are some of the high-profile coaches you like, how they go about their business?
So there's two coaches here that I'm particularly interested in for two kind of different reasons. Giselle Mather, who's the head coach of Wasps Ladies in the women's premiership over here, is someone who, whenever I've heard her talk, she's impressed me. How she creates an environment. She was the first level 4 female coach in the UK. She coached out at Teddington for years and came in and coached men's side. I just think what she does is hugely impressive. And I think what they're doing at Wasps is pretty cool. They ran Quins fairly close in their semi this year, and Quins went on to win it. So I think she's very admirable. And then the other one is Dan McKellar, who's obviously the Brumbies coach for the last few years and the Wallabies forwards coach.
Just recently announced. Yeah.
So so the Brumbies are very, very close to my heart because when I was in school, my coach was an Aussie and he was a Canberra boy, and we used to watch a lot of the kind of old school Brumbies
that
stuff.
2000 kind of era team.
Yeah,
unreal.
So a lot of our plays were named after Larkham or Gregan or Roth or whatnot. So they've always kind of had a place in my heart, and I think the way the Brumbies have gone the last number of years, I like what Dan McKellar, I like what he kind of stands for. I like what he's trying to do. He's obviously got support there with Laurie Fisher there behind him, but he's someone I hugely admire. And he did a stint in Ireland. So, that's another reason to like him.
Yeah, of course. Where in Ireland was he? Was he in Munster?
No, he went to So he went to like some. He went to like Wicklow RFC, who are some junior club. Right.
His coaching pathway is interesting. He hasn't just like stepped in and gone, okay, here I am. It's been a journey. So that's a good one to see as well.
He went to Japan, I think, then for a while, and he was I think he was literally typing up an email to say, can I have my job back at whatever he was doing? And then Laurie Fisher said, do you want to come in and give it a go? So he's an interesting guy.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely want to hit up for a chat. All right, and final question, who's someone in the grassroots who's doing really cool stuff and deserves some recognition and a shout out?
So I can't really look beyond Rhys Davies, who I coach at the HAC with. Right. So Rhys works for the RFU, formerly of London Irish. And he challenges me an awful lot in what I do. He asks really good questions. He sees the game in a pretty cool way. He's got the best interests of people at heart. So he's someone again who's great. And also Charlotte Fredrickson has come on board with us this year, and it's been great to have her insight. She used to play for Saracens women's team, and she sees the game in a different way to us. And I think that, as I said, she challenges us and provokes us to look at things differently. So Rhys and Charlotte are great people to work alongside.
Awesome. Great to have a team of coaches that is diverse and brings all different things to the table. It just makes the whole environment much better. All right. Well, it's been awesome chatting with you about your coaching journey and the blog and your new endeavors. So just want to thank you for giving up your time and coming on the show for a chat.
No worries, mate. As I said, this has definitely been a resource that I've got so much from, and it's a big part of the journey that I'm on. So no, thank you.
Awesome. And my pleasure. And maybe in real life, we'll share a pint one day.
Happy to. Yeah, that sounds good.
Perfect.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at RugbyCoachesCNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.